control. The Congress is saying that the minister is conveniently obfuscating the issue. After all, Rahul Gandhi is in the opposition. It's not his job to be sending the troops. It is the party in power that has to be doing that. It's going to be 3 years this summer when China unilaterally changed the status quo. The question we're asking, and we'll have a full panel here on Brass Tacks, the question we're asking is, are we any closer to resolving this standard?
There is a phrase, war by other means. There is also, think of it, this is politics by another means.
External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar questioning the timing of the BBC documentary on Prime Minister Modi and the criticism of American billionaire George Soros.
There's a surge of reports and, attention and views. Were some of these things not happening earlier? I gave you the example of Assam.
Yeah.
People speak about, okay, you had to make a documentary. Many things happened in Delhi in 1984. Why didn't we see a documentary on that? So come on, you think the timing is accidental? Let me tell you one thing. I don't know if election season has started in India and Delhi or not, but for sure it has started in London and New York. I was very clear with what is called.
Jaishankar said the motive behind such stories abroad was to spread an anti-India agenda.
Just like I told you, this drip, 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 how do you shape a very extremist image of India, of the government, of the BJP, of the Prime Minister? Look, this is a globalized world. People take that politics abroad. Politics of India doesn't stop at its borders. Sometimes politics of India doesn't even originate in its borders. It comes from outside.
The minister also hit back at Congress MP Rahul Gandhi, who has been targeting the Modi government over China's aggression at the LAC.
If I were to sum up the China thing, please do not, buy this whole, I would say, again, I use this word, this narrative that somewhere government is on the defensive, somewhere we are being accommodative. I ask people, if we were being accommodative, who sent the Indian army to the LAC? Rahul Gandhi didn't send it. Narendra Modi sent it.
So is there a deliberate anti-India agenda being raked up in the run-up to the 2024 Lok Sabha elections?
All right, we'll open this up to our full panel tonight on Brass Tacks. We'll be joined in a moment by Tuin Sinha of the BJP and Supresh Srinath of the Congress. Smita Prakash, editor ANI, to whom Dr. Jaishankar gave that podcast. She's joining us on the broadcast this evening. Professor Brahma Chalani, strategic affairs expert, and Professor Victor Gao is chair professor at the Suzhou University and a former Chinese diplomat. Smita Prakash, let me start with you first. I'll start with the China part, where the External Affairs Minister said that, it's not Rahul Gandhi who sent the troops to the LAC. It is the government. It is Narendra Modi who sent the troops to the LAC. But are we any closer to knowing, through the course of your podcast, are we any closer to knowing from the EAM or from government as to why China changed the status quo, and why is it that after 16 rounds of Corps Commander talks, the status quo ante as it existed pre-April 2020, we've not been able to go back to?
Well, I think, when he said about Rahul Gandhi, that bit was because it was a question which was intended to provoke, to find out whether the BJP is on the back foot or not, as far as the opposition making these allegations that they are not, that they are squeamish about, saying anything on China. Because what I asked him was that why doesn't the Prime Minister say China? Why don't you say China? To which he responded in that manner. As far as whether we are whether India and China at any point of time right now are they placed to resolve the conflict? I don't think so. Because the impression that I got out of after the interview was that we are fortifying our positions out there. China is doing their bit, and there seems to be some kind of a stagnation as far as the talks are concerned. I did ask him as to why do we keep our side of the bargain every time and China doesn't seem to do it. To which he replied, but that's how countries do. That India has signed agreements with China before, and that has resulted in decades of peace.
Okay.
And India is not one to break those agreements. And he listed them out, and he said it's not necessary that those agreements were signed under which regime, but government of India, regardless of which political power was in place, they signed it, and it's up to the country's mature democracies to keep to the agreements that they have signed.
Okay, so let me ask Rupriya Srinath. Time and again, Rahul Gandhi in Parliament and outside has said that the Prime Minister is afraid of China, the External Affairs Minister is afraid of China, they don't take the name of China. You heard that podcast with Smita Prakash. The External Affairs Minister not only did take the name of China, but he also said, and he attacked your leader by saying it's not Rahul Gandhi who sent the troops to the LAC, it is Narendra Modi. And this, according to him, is the largest peacetime deployment of the military at the line of actual control. Net, what he's essentially saying is if the government of India is matching China troop for troop in defending every inch of our territory, then what would Rahul Gandhi have?
You know, quite frankly, I heard that podcast, and with all due respect to Smitaji here, I think the External Affairs Minister sounds childish, churlish and immature. And I don't expect the highest diplomat in this country to sound the way he does. He almost sounds petulant, he almost sounds trollish. And I'll tell you why. When he makes this boisterous statement about the Prime Minister sending the troops and not Rahul Gandhi, obviously he will, because he is the Prime Minister and he is taking the calls, being in government. I mean, what a silly statement to make to begin with. But I actually want to show the mirror to the External Affairs Minister, because he chooses to troll people on social media. And instead of talking about substantive issues, I want to ask him, too bad you're doing what you're doing with China. Why are we not being able to restore status quo ante April 2020? That is the question that people want to ask. 36 months into the crisis, we still do not have status quo ante. We've converted large parts of our patrolling points into buffer zones. Who's going to be responsible for that? And may I dare also say to India's External Affairs Minister, who of course called Sushma Swaraj names according to Pompeo's book, against which the External Affairs Minister, by the way, has taken no objection and has not moved court, not sued him. Forget about that. But I would like to ask the External Affairs Minister only one question. What has your diplomacy resulted in? Because according to your own government, whatever happens in India is happening due to an international conspiracy. What the hell are you doing in job then?
Okay.
Because if international conspiracy is furthering issues in India, what exactly are you doing in office? Where is diplomacy? I would really want to ask him that
Okay,
question.
I'll come to
Is
the
all your
international
diplomacy being geared to
conspiracy
trolling?
parts in just one second. So let Tuin Sinha respond on the China bit. I mean, essentially, isn't the External Affairs Minister being a bit disingenuous when he says Rahul Gandhi did not send the troops to the LAC? It's Narendra Modi. Of course it is Narendra Modi. Narendra Modi is in power, not Rahul Gandhi. The question that is being asked again and again is, you have sent the troops, at least in 2 of the 7 places where there was this eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation. At least in 2 of those places, the status quo ante as it existed pre-2020 is not happening. Depsang and Demchok. It is now a new normal there. What are you doing to change that? What are you doing to impose costs on China? What are you doing to push the Chinese back to pre-April 2020 position? That's the question that's being asked by the Congress and other opposition parties. Tuin.
Good evening, Zaka. Zaka, the point which External Affairs Minister was simply making is that Rahul Gandhi's unnatural awe of China put India in an uncomfortable position. And that he gave an example of that as recently as in May 2002, when Rahul Gandhi was in England. He made a comment praising China and saying that, China has been offering prosperity to all countries. He said that at a time when China had wreaked havoc upon the world, he was basically endorsing that diplomacy. So when External Affairs Minister specifically mentioned how we have stood up to China, he was basically calling out Rahul Gandhi's chicanery throughout the China episode. And so, status quo that you have just asked, see, that is work in progress. Fact is that we have stood up to China in a way that no previous government had done, and that is reflected in the scale of border infrastructure creation, which is unprecedented. We have a 3,488 kilometer border with China, but right from Ladakh to Arunachal, if you look at the infrastructure creation, that has prevented many further incursions which would have anyway taken place, which were very commonplace during the UPA era. We have initiated a slew of PLI schemes which are eventually going to take away China's manufacturing progress. That again is work in progress. In fact, the Quad group initiated by us was very clearly an attempt to restrain or to restrict China's expansionist tendencies. In fact, the Prime Minister has on so many occasions spoke about expansionist forces. Who else was he referring to? So if the Congress does not have basic IQ or common sense to
So
understand,
let me go to Professor Brahmachalani and Professor Victor Gao as well. Brahmachalani, let me ask you this. You know, one of the things that the External Affairs Minister said in that podcast is that the amount of money that's being spent on infrastructure development in the border areas has gone up 5 times in the last 5 years. Now, admittedly, India may have been slow in catching up to the pace of construction of border infrastructure. Obviously, the Chinese have had a head start to it. But his contention is, particularly in the last few years, India has been matching China road for road, infrastructure for infrastructure. Does that cut ice with you? And I want to come back to this whole, fundamental question that there were 7 places where there were friction points. In 5 of those 7, at least disengagement has begun and happened. But in 2 of those places, even disengagement has not begun or happened. 16 rounds of talks. Is this going to be the new normal, or are we still hopeful that there will be a return to status quo ante as it existed pre-2020?
Saka, China's April 2020 stealthy land grabs in Ladakh were not the first time India was caught napping by a foe. But to forestall another nasty surprise, India should at least have an open debate on why it was taken unawares. Unfortunately, there's no debate in India on China. There's no debate in Parliament. There's no debate even in the Indian press on China. The fact is that India-China relations have fallen to their lowest level in decades, with no end in sight to the prolonged military standoff between the 2 countries. In fact, the opposite is happening. You have seen how Xi Jinping's Lunar New Year inspection of PLA's combat readiness against India indicates how involved he is personally in the Himalayan military confrontation. In fact, not content with the major military standoffs in Ladakh, China in recent weeks has built up offensive new forces along the Arunachal Pradesh and Sikkim borders and in occupied Doklam. So despite the brutal Himalayan winter, China has deployed thousands of additional PLA troops along the border of Arunachal Pradesh, and thousands more near India's so-called chicken neck. So we focus on Ladakh, but the entire border is becoming hot. And in fact, the risks of escalation are growing. So there needs to be a debate. There needs to be why we were taken unawares by the April 2020 Chinese land grabs. There needs to be a debate also about accountability. For example, not a single army commander was relieved of command, despite what happened in April 2020. So in a way, what we see, this back and forth between Rahul Gandhi and Jaishankar, in a way is good, because at least we're having some sort of a debate on the border situation.
So let me go to Professor Victor Gao. The issue here, Professor Gao, is the India-China border flare-up has not happened in isolation. China, since Xi Jinping took office in 2012, has been very consciously and very deliberately sort of pushing the envelope with a whole bunch of its neighbors, whether it is with the Philippines for the Scarborough Shoal and the Paracel Islands, with Vietnam, they're having territorial disputes, with Japan, of course, everybody knows the Diaoyu, Senkaku Island disputes. There are a whole bunch of countries, and Taiwan, of course, I don't even want to go into Taiwan. We all know what is going on vis-a-vis Taiwan. So in all of this, the common factor is one, and that is that it is China that is making the first move to unilaterally change the status quo. And that is what it is doing in the border with India as well.
With due respect, allow me to emphasize this is completely untrue to the realities. You know for sure that China has 14 land neighboring countries. China has already signed the border treaties with 12 of them. Only 2 countries have not signed border treaties with China, India and Bhutan. Therefore, China does have a solid track record of signing border treaties with its land neighboring countries, especially with India. And I'm truly convinced that once China and India can sign border treaty, China-Bhutan land border treaty will definitely be signed.
Now, Professor, I'm sorry I'm interrupting, but what about maritime disputes?
Yeah.
Those are still very much active.
For the maritime disputes, allow me to emphasize one point. By 1945, when Japan unconditionally surrendered to China and to the United States, Japan was sitting on all the islands, isles, reefs, atolls in the South China Sea. Then Japan surrendered all these islands, atolls, reefs in the South China Sea to whom? To China, with the consent and the support of whom? Of the United States. At that time, there was no Vietnam, there was no Malaysia, there was no Philippines. All these countries were colonies. And they achieved independence much later than 1945. Therefore, if you really do some historical homework, you will know China regained control of all the islands, atolls, and reefs in the South China Sea in 1945 as a result of victory against fascist Japan.
I'm not sure that that's how the historical facts bear themselves out. As far as I know, a lot of these islands had been given to the United States, including, of course, in the Philippines and Vietnam, etc. But anyway, be that as it may, I want to come back to the second part of what the External Affairs Minister said, and this was about this recent controversies involving George Soros, the BBC documentary. So let me ask Smita Prakash this. Is the minister convinced, is everyone in government convinced that there are forces outside this country that are out to get them, that want to peddle, according to them, a false narrative that India has become an intolerant country, Mr. Modi's government is intolerant towards minorities, so on and so forth? And the criticism is that, in a year like the G20 year, when India is supposed to be this big power, it's going to be a coming of age year for India, if you're going to respond to every brick bat, that doesn't make you look like a big power, that makes you look like a petulant one.
Zaka, before I come to the question, I think Supriya ji said that Dr. Jaishankar is the topmost diplomat. He isn't. The topmost diplomat is the Foreign Secretary, which Dr. Jaishankar was. He retired, then joined the Modi cabinet and much later joined the BJP, which makes him a politician, a complete politician, who's an external affairs minister and has diplomatic duties, but not the topmost diplomat of the country. Little bit of a change. The other thing which I agree with what Professor Chalani said, that there is a fog of war when it comes to China. That's always been the case, if I'm not mistaken. Professor Chalani knows better. Because, India has always been open and awkward, not so open and awkward when it comes to China. And I think that comes from the loss of war, because loss in war with China. And I think when it comes to talking openly, Dr. Jaishankar did speak about it. But, yes, I agree with Dr. Chalani that no open punishment as such seems to have happened for 2020. But when I believe gaming for a conflict has been happening, it's a work in progress, and more so since 2020. Now, as far as the Soros allegations, the BBC documentary, the Hindenburg thing, I did ask Dr. Jaishankar, and I did ask him this very thing, that does he agree with this and banning that? Doesn't it look awkward? As far as he is concerned, and as far as the BJP is concerned, and there's no difference between the two, he is quite clear that this is like what you say, war by other means. This is politics by other means, and it's not coincidental that there are these documentaries and reports and things which are happening. Now, you and I might think that it is overreaction, and the Congress certainly would think that it is overreaction, but the BJP believes that it is a well thought out strategy, and that that politics is being played outside the geographical boundaries and being used by echo chambers within the country.
Okay, so let me ask Supriya Srinath this. This is what the External Affairs Minister said. You've heard of the phrase war by other means. This is politics by other means. Do you think the timing of all of these attacks are accidental? There are forces who have realized that they cannot dislodge the Narendra Modi government through democratic or electoral means. Now they are resorting to undemocratic and non-electoral means. This is what the BJP, the External Affairs Minister, the Prime Minister, they firmly believe so, whether or not you like it. And again, even in your party, the first reaction after Mr. Soros's comments was from the head of your media cell, who said that we don't need a Soros to change the government in this country. That depends on the opposition, and that depends on the people of India. Some other leaders in your party seem to have taken a different stand. My question is simple. Shouldn't we take a very commonsensical approach to what is being perceived as an interference by an outsider in the Indian democratic process?
So when Standard Chartered, Credit Suisse and Citigroup say they will not accept Adani bonds, when indices like Dow Jones and S&P throw out the Adani stocks from their sustainability index, when the UK regulator decides to probe both Elara Capital and Adani, when the Norwegian pension fund decides to sell its stake in the Adani group, what should we say?
No, that's
Is
a
that an
private
international
company. That's a
conspiracy?
private.
And
I'm
they
not
all
talking
say
about the
there-
private company.
Let me please finish.
Yeah.
Let me please finish. Let me please finish.
Sure, go ahead.
These are all reactions to a serious, these are all reactions to a very serious case of misgovernance, a very serious case where allegations of a web of shell companies through which perhaps Benami money is being floated into India in a group which has monopoly positions in ports, airports, food, agriculture, renewable energy, cement and whatnot. The government doesn't seem to care about any of these allegations. The government doesn't even seem to be remotely interested in finding out if there are indeed shell companies of Benami money. My point on this is different. You can be jingoistic, you can be xenophobic, I couldn't care less. But let us not put our democracy to shame. We have institutions, we have a democratic culture, resort to that. And if BBC indeed was something that you wanted to tackle with, especially at a time when you want to be the Vishwaguru and doing all the G20 tamasha, please let me ask you a question. What did you do through the diplomatic channel? And is Jaishankar not a failed minister not to be able to do anything? And is Mr. Jaishankar not a failed minister that India, after the crisis in Galwan Valley, where 20 of our brave hearts lost their life, India went ahead and increased our trade with China many-fold. Today, China is our largest trading partner for the last 3 years, and we have a trade deficit with China to the tune of $100 billion. We
Okay.
are almost funding China to do what they're doing at the border.
So let Tuhin
Is the
respond to
Minister
that.
of
Tuhin
External
respond to that.
Affairs
My
remotely
limited
interested in this?
intervention was, the set of allegations against a private company is separate from the allegations of interference in India's democracy. Those are two separate things. But Tuhin, please respond.
But the
I think
private
Supriya
company enjoys
Su-
extremely.
Supriya,
No, 1 second.
yeah.
Dhaka, the private company enjoys extremely close ties with
Of
India's
course,
Prime Minister.
of course.
And
If-
one of the
if
reasons why
those-
the private company is going scot-free is his allegiance to the Prime
those
Minister. and the Prime
allegations
Minister
need
getting
to
out there
be
and supporting him.
those allegations need to be probed on merit. I'm not disputing that, but that's not the same as meddling with India's internal democracy. But Tuhin, no, on the question that she asked, which is a fair one to ask, I mean, we had Galwan 2020, 20 of our soldiers died, and yet the 22-23 trade with China is 130 billion. It's the highest that we have with any country.
Insofar as the trade deficit is concerned, it's a temporary phenomenon because many a times there are backlogs which get reflected in the present year. But with the slew of PLI schemes which have come up, eventually you will see China being the worst sufferer of our initiatives. Now, let me also answer the specific charges being made against Adani. Now, Adani Group is competent to answer that. But if the Congress has any morality left in it, first they should scrap all the orders, all the contracts, or at least review all the contracts given to the Adani Group by Chhattisgarh and Rajasthan government in the last 2 or 3 years. They keep making these allegations, but keep giving business to the same group. Now, SEBI is already carrying out its investigation, but when they specifically mention shell companies, I'm sorry, the only shell company involvement, a clear case that I know of, is involves the National Herald case where Rahul Gandhi is out on bail.
Okay. No, let me go to Brahma Chalani and then Victor Gao for the final word. Brahma Chalani, just in terms of, there are clearly competing sort of approaches to the China question. India is saying that, look, you have to resolve this boundary issue, especially this attempt to change the status quo. Unless we go back to pre-2020 status quo ante as it existed, we can't discuss other areas of the relationship. China is saying, let's leave the border aside. Let's keep that in cold storage for now. Let's discuss the other issues. How do you, come to terms with the fact that the BJP government is saying, resolve the border first, everything else later, and yet our trade with China is at the highest that it's ever been?
You're absolutely right. First, I think that Xi Jinping made a serious strategic miscalculation by launching the border aggression against India in April 2020. He's actually making a permanent enemy of India, which is not in China's long-term interest. India is more determined than ever to forestall the rise of a Sino-centric Asia. Second, miscalculation that he made was that he did not anticipate a robust Indian military response to the Chinese aggression. India has locked horns with China militarily in a way no other country has done, not even the United States. For more than 33 months, India has been locked in military standoffs with China. And that has come as a big surprise, a shock to the Chinese leadership, that India seems determined to persist in this confrontation until and unless status quo ante is restored in Ladakh. So given these realities and given India's determination, I think this confrontation will continue. It'll continue until such time the Chinese leadership realizes that it's its own interest of China to make peace with India.
Okay.
Because making a permanent enemy of India means that China can never become the dominant power in Asia.
Okay, I'll give the final word to Professor Victor Gao. Just look at, the geopolitical situation. This week, we're going to be marking the one-year anniversary of this Russia-Ukraine war. I think all of us can agree that the immediate sort of attack exactly a year ago on the 24th of February was launched by Russia. You can go into the merits or demerits of why Putin launched that attack, but it is a fact that Putin is the one who launched that attack. And today, in a speech to the National Parliament there, he said that, it was the West that provoked the attack, so on and so forth. But how do you expect any country, leave alone India, any neutral country, to side with what is seemingly now a growing Sino-Russian alliance of sorts? Today, right now, the Wall Street Journal is reporting that days after Biden went to Ukraine, Mr. Xi Jinping is planning to go to Russia.
First of all, I'm very much pleased to see that India has maintained a very robust and close relations with Russia, especially in terms of trade, especially focusing on oil, etc. And this is against a tremendous amount of pressure from the United States and Western countries in general. And this actually illustrates the independence of foreign policy of India, which is decided by the Indian government and the Indian people. To that extent, I actually give high compliment to the Indians' independence of foreign policy.
It's interesting you say that, Professor Gao. Sorry, I'm interrupting again. It's interesting you say that because the Chinese narrative has always been, though, you Indians you're in the American camp, you're in the American camp. So I'm glad you're saying that now.
Well, the striking thing about India is that it does have a very strong tradition of independence and non-aligned tradition of foreign policy. Okay. And I think this is the true value of India as it is. And in the war in Ukraine, India illustrated its independence very eloquently and has won the compliment of many countries, including China. Now, secondly, when you talk about the war in Ukraine, it is not a war between Russia and the Ukraine. It is, in its real essence, a war between Russia on the one hand and the United States and NATO using Ukraine as their surrogate. It is the new type of war. It's the surrogate war. It's the proxy war that we are talking about.
Okay.
And if anyone believes that they can defeat Russia in Ukraine, forcing Russia into the corner, I think they probably commit the biggest geopolitical blunder in their own judgment, to their own detriment.
I got to wrap up. I'm completely out of time. Thank you very much, though, to Tuhin Sinha, Supriya Srinath, Smita Prakash, Brahma Chalani, and Victor Gao for joining us. I want to move on to a second story also concerning our neighborhood. Our second story tonight, writer and lyricist Javed Akhtar reminded a gathering in Pakistan. He was there to celebrate the legendary Pakistani poet Faiz. He, in Lahore, speaking to an audience, said that the perpetrators of 26/11 are still very much roaming free in that country, and to expect any Indian to not have any complaints about this would be unfair. He was in Pakistan to attend a festival organized in memory of the Urdu poet Faiz Ahmed Faiz.
मैं यहाँ में तकल्लुफ से काम नहीं लूँगा। हमने तो नुसरत के बड़े-बड़े फंक्शन किए, मेहदी हसन के बड़े-बड़े फंक्शन किए। आपके मुल्क में तो लता मंगेशकर का कोई फंक्शन नहीं है। तो हकीकत ये है, चलिए अब हम एक दूसरे को इल्जाम न दें, उससे सॉल्व नहीं होगा। ये अहम बात ये है कि ये जो आजकल इतना गर्म है फिजा, वो कम होनी चाहिए। हम तो बंबई के लोग हैं, हमने देखा हमारे शहर पे कैसे हमला हुआ था। तो वो लोग नॉर्वे से तो नहीं आए थे, ना इजिप्ट से आए थे, वो लोग अभी भी आपके मुल्क में घूम रहे हैं। तो ये शिकायत अगर हिंदुस्तानी के दिल में हो तो आपको बुरा नहीं मानना चाहिए।
So what exactly is the status of all the terrorists behind this worst terror attack that happened on Indian soil? Hafiz Saeed was the chief conspirator of the attack. He trained the 10 terrorists who were involved in 26/11. He's been in and out of jail in Pakistan. The last time was in 2019 when he was arrested in a terror financing case. Zakir Rahman Lakhvi played his part in planning and executing the attack. He was sentenced to a 5-year prison term in 2021 on terror financing charges. Sajid Mir was one of the handlers of the terrorists who carried out the attack. In June last year, he was jailed for 15 years in a terror financing case. David Coleman Headley, a Pakistani American, was accused of wrecking and making videos of the locations that were targeted by the terrorists. He's serving a 35-year sentence in the United States. And Abdul Rahman Makki is the deputy chief of the Lashkar-e-Taiba. He too was involved in the planning and the execution of 26/11. Earlier this year, he was blacklisted by the United Nations. Now, take a look at how Pakistan has been dragging its feet over the last 10 plus years now in bringing the perpetrators of 26/11 to book. The trial began in 2009 in an anti-terrorism court in Rawalpindi. 5 years later, it was transferred to another court, this time in Islamabad. In 2015, the Islamabad High Court set a 2-month deadline for the trial court to conclude. In 2016, the Pakistani court warned that the case could be further delayed if India does not send witnesses. They had summoned 24 Indian witnesses at that point. In 2018, the chief prosecutor who was running this case was removed from the case for not toeing the government line. The trial was later suspended in 2019 to give the prosecution more time to produce the witnesses who hadn't testified. And in January this year, Pakistan's anti-terrorism court summoned 27 Indian witnesses to appear in court. So let me go across to Professor Brahma Chalani, strategic affairs expert, and Kamar Shima, strategic and political analyst, joining us. Kamar Shima, let me start with you first. I mean, if you want India-Pakistan relations to come back to some kind of, normalcy, if you will, you have to address the elephant in the room, and that is terrorism. Not just 26/11, which Javed Akhtar also reminded his audience about, but also the other subsequent terror attacks that have happened, from Pathankot to Uri to other attacks that have happened as well, Pulwama. All of that, there needs to be some semblance of justice for.
You are absolutely right. I think all bilateral issues which Pakistan and India, and all bilateral challenges which Pakistan and India have, they must be addressed. The Indian issue that Pakistan sponsors terrorism, and the Pakistani problems that India has been sponsoring terrorism in Balochistan and via Afghanistan, everything needs to be discussed. And I think here the magnanimity of the leadership comes. Here the political acumen of the leadership comes in. Here the leadership needs to come forward, and they need to forget whatever has happened in the past. You remember the former Army Chief General Bajwa said in Islamabad Security Dialogue that Pakistan and India, we need to forget the past. We need to bury the past, in fact.
No, but Mr. Chima, sorry I'm interrupting. You can't have it both ways, right? On the one hand, you are saying, yes, these need to be addressed, these need to be talked about, and at the other, in the same breath, you're saying we should forget about the past. You can't have both of it.
Well, I think if we come up, the history of India and Pakistan, that is not something to be remembered much. If you, starting from 1947 till now, I think Vajpayee Sahib said that we just cannot change the neighbors, and I think he was absolutely right. We cannot change the neighbors. So I think that's why I'm saying the magnanimity of the leadership is important. I can have 100 problems with India. India can have 150 problems with Pakistan.
Okay.
But we have to take a start. From where to take a start, I think that's
magnanimity is one thing. I mean, I don't think it's a question of magnanimity. It's a question of diplomacy. But more than that, I think it's also a question of accountability. If there are certain actions that have been taken and the roots of it are traced back to Pakistan, then where is the accountability to hold the perpetrators of that action to justice? But be that as it may, Brahma Chalani, you have this situation where today, Pakistan's almost facing like an existential crisis because of the economy being in the doldrums. Of course, no neighbor wants to see a neighbor of its completely collapse into this kind of economic mess that Pakistan finds itself in. Is there a strategic window of opportunity that India has to try and see, if nothing else, to at least attempt to have some kind of a normal relationship with Pakistan? Right now, we don't even have full-fledged embassies in both countries. We don't have high commissioners in both countries. That's not a normal relationship.
if more than 14 years after the deadly Mumbai terrorist attacks, the trial hasn't started in Pakistan, the perpetrators are still free roaming at large, how can there be a normal relationship between these two countries? In fact, India's recent notice to Pakistan to renegotiate the Indus Waters Treaty is a clear sign that India's patience is wearing thin and that India is seeking to leverage the Indus Waters Treaty to open a bloodless path to help halt Pakistan's sponsorship of cross-border terrorism. And now India has two options on the Indus Waters Treaty. One example has been set by Russia today, which suspended its participation in the New START Treaty without formally withdrawing from it. So India can also suspend its participation in the Indus Waters Treaty without formally withdrawing from it. And the second option that India has is to follow the American example. The US unilaterally withdrew from two binding treaties, the ABM Treaty and the INF Treaty, both treaties with Russia. It withdrew unilaterally. It scrapped them unilaterally. So that's the second option for India. But certainly, the India-Pakistan relationship can never be normal unless Pakistan severes its links with state-sponsored terror groups. It uses terrorism as an instrument of state policy.
No,
India's water generosity, much of the water in the Indus system, the sixth river Indus system, more than 80% of the water in the sixth river Indus system is reserved for Pakistan. And this cross-border sponsorship of terrorism by Pakistan violates the spirit of this water generosity embedded in the Indus Waters Treaty.
Yeah.
How can India put up with this kind of state sponsorship of terrorism indefinitely?
Kamar Chima, you have today a live example of this state policy of, hunting with the hares and the hounds. Look at what has happened with Afghanistan. You cultivated the Taliban. You thought they would be some kind of a strategic ally. Today, they have unleashed the TTP on you. And look at the number of attacks that have happened in Peshawar, in Karachi over the weekend. This is a live example of the policy of the Pakistani state to use terror as an instrument of foreign policy coming to bite you back.
Well, let me complete you the sentence. Pakistan, Americans, Saudis, and every other country that wanted to bring the Soviet Union in Afghanistan created Taliban. Yes, we are the main players because we were the breeding ground where everything was being hedged. But the question is not that the Pakistan did it alone, one thing. The second thing is that, yes, our policies have been very, very different. It should have been, we go through soul searching. Whatever the price, whatever the mistakes we have made in the history, we are paying the price with our blood. And that's the reality. With our blood, with the backwardness, with the destruction of the country, with all that, what we are seeing right now is that since the leadership, either it is the civil or the military, they didn't take a decision. But don't call that we created the Taliban.
No, one second. Chima Saab. No. Well, the Taliban as a creation, as an entity, yes, you're right. The Saudis, the Americans, the Pakistanis all had a role to play. But this was in the late 70s. By the early 1980s, the Soviets had left Afghanistan. Please pray explain to our viewers why Pakistan was continuing to support such an entity for the last 30 years, including after the war on terror was launched. There was no compelling reason why you should have continued to support something that you said, was jointly invented by the three countries that you named.
Yeah, you are absolutely right. Let me quote here Hillary Clinton, who said that once in the UN General Assembly, I think she was sitting in a Security Council, and she spoke that after the Soviet disintegration, we washed our hands, we went away from the region. And now what happened after 20 years, we had 10 years, we had to come back in Afghanistan in this way. That is one way of looking at the thing. The other thing is that we have to take the responsibility of all the mess that was created. We should have taken the responsibility that we nurtured the Taliban and we kept letting that happen.
Yeah.
The Kalashnikov culture, the drug culture, we must take the responsibility ourselves. And the very fundamental question is that we are the ones who are being affected by the terrorism, and we are the ones who are being blamed that we are supporting and harnessing the terrorism. These are very uncomfortable questions, and we keep raising these questions in Pakistan, and I think, but we are the victim of terrorism.
So let me give the final word to Professor Brahma Chalani. Do you see anything give in Pakistan? Like I said, I outlined the economic mess that they find themselves in, and then of course there is now this political/security nightmare with the TTP virtually, it's an open challenge that they have declared to the Pakistani state. Do you see anything giving whereby this policy of proxy wars, whether it was in Afghanistan or in India, the Pakistani generals changing that? Because it's eating their country.
You're absolutely right. At the root of Pakistan's problems is the skewed civil-military relationship, which fosters a pervasive lack of accountability in that country. The military has expanded its role even to economic management. So Pakistan's economic plight today has less to do with economic policy, but more to do with the lack of accountability. Nawaz Sharif put it very well a couple of years ago when he said, the Pakistan military has progressed from being a state within a state to becoming a state above the state. A state above the state is how the military functions in Pakistan. That's the reason why Pakistan's nexus with terrorism remains intact. And that's the reason why Pakistan-India relations will not become normal.
Okay.
But it's more about Pakistan's future, because if the military remains a state above the state, Pakistan can never be at peace with itself, which means it can never be out of a crisis. It'll lurch from one crisis to the next. And this is unfortunate for its neighbors, because whether it's Afghanistan or India, Pakistan will remain a major source of trouble.
All right. I'm going to leave it at that. Like I think somebody pointed this out in one of the earlier shows, the Pakistan Army in non-defense related businesses churns out something like 250 billion Pakistan rupees of revenue every year, and yet they don't pay as much taxes, percentage-wise at least, as the average Pakistani pays on income tax. So we'll see how this story plays out. But we do have a piece of news which might come in as some kind of a relief for Pakistan. China, to whom it owes over $10 billion of money which needs to be rolled over or interest have to be paid. China now has agreed to refinance about $2 billion worth of debt that was outstanding for the remainder of this year. Now they have decided to refinance that portion, so it's about a fifth of what was the debt that was supposed to be either repaid back this year or had to be rolled over. Refinancing payments and the contours of that will be received by this Friday. Siddhant has more details on this. Siddhant, while this might be some slight temporary relief, it remains to be seen as to how much of the remaining debt China is willing to roll over to the next year.
Well, look, Zaka, we all know that the shape of economy is really bad in Pakistan. In fact, the ninth review, which was happening till week back, even the teams have concluded the review process, and one staff level agreement, which was expected to be signed between IMF teams and Pakistan, wasn't signed, and teams left Pakistan. And that was a big disappointment for the government in Pakistan as well as the whole country, because all hopes were from the IMF, because if IMF will release the fund, the installment, then only country can revive. But that did not happen. It is going to take some time. So now what Pakistan is doing, Dhaka, is taking help of friends. Now China is a close friend of Pakistan. China has heavily invested in the infrastructure in Pakistan, especially CPEC. And this is perhaps the reason that this request was made to China, if they can again refinance this $2 billion. And in fact, now we are getting to know that the request has been accepted by the government in China. And now this is a big relief for the Pakistan, where on one end, IMF funds are going to take some more time. On the other end, now China has come out to save Pakistan. So now Pakistan doesn't need to pay back this $2 billion to China.
All right, Siddhant, we'll leave it at that. We'll see how the story plays out for Pakistan. So $2 billion out of the $10 billion owed to China for this year, that has now been decided to be refinanced. Let me now move on to the other story. Russian President Vladimir Putin today made an address to the Russian parliament the week that the world marks his decision to invade Ukraine, which happened exactly a year ago. Putin says it was not he who started the war, it was the West. And he says we are ready to withdraw tomorrow, but Ukraine and the West need to stop. It's clear, coming as it does 24 hours after Joe Biden's pit stop in Kiev, that peace is still very much elusive in the battlefields of Ukraine.
Kyiv stands, and Ukraine stands. Democracy stands. The Americans stand with you, and the world stands with you.
Addressing the Russian parliament just days before the one-year anniversary of the Ukraine war, Putin put the onus of the war on the West. He said the responsibility for fueling the Ukrainian conflict, for its escalation, the number of victims, it all lies completely with the Western elites. He went on to play the victim card, saying that he has done everything possible to solve this issue by peaceful means and negotiating a peaceful way out. But he said that the West is trying to turn a local conflict into a global one, and that Russia will react in an appropriate way because this, according to him, is about the existence of his country. Putin also vowed to systematically press on with Russia's offensive in Ukraine, saying that he will carefully and systematically solve the aims that face his nation. But perhaps the most significant announcement from Putin today was the decision to suspend Moscow's participation in the New START treaty, which is the last remaining nuclear arms control pact between Russia and the United States. Under the New START treaty, United States and Russia had pledged to limit the two sides' strategic nuclear arsenals. Giving reasons for the decision, Putin blamed the United States and its NATO allies of openly declaring the goal of Russia's defeat in Ukraine. He claimed that NATO allies had helped Ukraine mount drone attacks on Russian air bases, which were hosting nuclear-capable strategic missiles. Putin also said that Russia should stand ready to resume nuclear weapons tests if America does so. So this move would end a global ban on nuclear weapons testing that has been in place since the Cold War. The White House has described Putin's accusations against the West as absurdity. Putin's remarks come a day after the US President Joe Biden made a secret trip to Kiev and promised $500 million in additional fresh arms for the war-torn country. It was Biden's first visit to Ukraine since the war began last year. His 5-hour stopover sent a clear message to Putin of unwavering American support to Ukraine ahead of the first anniversary of Russia's invasion. So how much arms have the West given to Ukraine so far, and in what form? After dragging its feet for months, Germany has decided to send 2 Leopard 2 tanks. They are used by a number of European countries and considered to be easier to maintain and more fuel efficient than some of the other Western tanks. The US is sending about 31 Abrams tanks to Ukraine, which President Joe Biden describes as the most capable tanks in the world. The Stryker is one of the many armored vehicles that have been donated to Ukraine. The US also recently confirmed that 90 Strykers will be dispatched soon. Among the long-range rocket launchers sent to Ukraine by the United States are the HIMARS. They are believed to have been central to Ukraine's success in pushing Russian forces back in Kherson, particularly in November last year. Australia, Canada, and the United States were among the countries to send the advanced M777 howitzers, as well as other requisite ammunition to Ukraine. NATO countries are also planning to ramp up their supply of shells because Ukraine has been using them at a much faster rate than they are being delivered. Since the start of this conflict, Ukraine has been using the Soviet-era S-300 surface-to-air systems against Russian attacks. Now there are efforts to replenish them with similar systems that are stockpiled in other former Soviet countries like Slovakia. Drones have been featured heavily in this conflict so far, with many used for surveillance, targeting, as well as in heavy lift operations. Turkey has sold the Bayraktar 2 TB2 armed drones to Ukraine in recent months. And Ukraine is not the first time that the West has intervened in another country, the most famous being the war in Afghanistan. In 2001, an international military coalition led by the United States launched an invasion in Afghanistan, toppling the Taliban regime at that time. The conflict ended in 2021 with the return of the Taliban. In 2003, troops from the US, the UK, Australia, and Poland invaded Iraq. Then US President George W. Bush and UK Prime Minister Tony Blair has said that the coalition would disarm Iraq of weapons of mass destruction and end Saddam Hussein's regime. And that's exactly what happened. In 2011, a NATO-led coalition began a military intervention in Libya to implement an immediate ceasefire during the Libyan civil war and the crackdown on the Muammar Gaddafi regime. Gaddafi was killed. In 2017, a military operation led by US and involving UK, France, Canada, and Australia carried out strikes in Syria in support of Syrian rebels and against the Syrian Democratic Forces and the government of Bashar al-Assad. And in the 1960s, of course, the US became involved in Vietnam because it feared the spread of communism. Ultimately, they were unable to defeat the Viet Cong and were met with growing opposition to the war back home. So, many commentators saying that this is no longer just a Russia-Ukraine war. This is the United States versus Russia, Ukraine simply being a proxy. So how do these two militaries compare, the US and Russia? After all, they were stuck with 50 years of Cold War. When it comes to military aircraft, Russia has a little over 4,000 military aircraft. The US has more than 3 times that. Russia has about 1,500 military helicopters. The US has about 5,000 of them. Russia has about 150,000 armored vehicles. The US again has more than 3 times what Russia has in terms of armored personal carriers. Also, when it comes to aircraft carriers, Russia has only 1, the United States has 11. Russia has 70 submarines, whereas the United States has slightly less at 68. Russia has 15 destroyers, the US has 92. The Ukraine conflict is the biggest gamble taken by Vladimir Putin so far. In fact, over the last year, Russian forces have suffered 3 major battlefield reversals since this war began, but they still control about a fifth of Ukrainian territory. Tens of thousands of Russian forces have been killed. Putin now says Russia is locked in an existential battle with an arrogant West. The West and Ukraine have rejected his accusations and have joined forces to ensure that Moscow will not win this war. So, what next steps are going to happen in this seemingly unending war? Now, one thing is certain. Russia, at least as of today, is not in a position to outright win this war, as it had originally thought a year or so ago. Russia wanted to quickly capture Kiev and occupy eastern parts of Ukraine, displace the Zelensky regime. That has not happened. Russia's military has been dwindling in size and capability, so the chances are an independent and sovereign Ukrainian state will remain. In what form or fashion, we don't know, but it will continue to remain as an independent country. Ukraine's military racked up considerable success towards the end of 2022, and it may possibly build on that with additional counteroffensives. People are talking about a spring offensive. But driving the Russians completely out of Ukraine, particularly from the Donbass, that's going to be a stiff challenge, especially as the Russian army has prepared defensive positions. But when do both sides reach a state of mutual exhaustion that could possibly pave the way for negotiations? So far, neither side is blinking, so this could very well drag on for a number of months before there is a peaceful resolution. That's a wrap. Thanks very much for tuning in to Brass Tacks. Good night.
चेंबूर फेस्टिवल के लाइव कंसर्ट परफॉर्मेंस के बाद में सोनू निगम जी जब स्टेज से नीचे उतर रहे थे तब एक व्यक्ति ने उनको पीछे से पकड़ा। तो इस बारे में सोनू निगम जी के साथ वाले दोनों लोगों ने उसको बाजू करने का कोशिश किया। तब उस व्यक्ति ने दोनों लोगों को स्टेप से नीचे ढकेला। उसमें एक इंसान को इंजरी हुई। इस सिलसिले में सोनू निगम जी की एफआईआर ली गई, जिसमें आईपीसी सेक्शन 341, 323 और 337 इन सेक्शंस के तहत मामला दर्ज हुआ है। इस घटना में जिस इंसान ने उन्हें पकड़ा था और ढकेला वो स्वप्निल पाथर पे करके है।
Once again, the true face of the Uddhav Sena, which has now been reduced to a Gundo ki Sena, has come to the fore, with the MLA of Uddhav Sena, Prakash Fatarpekar's son, attacking Sonu Nigam and some other artists merely for a selfie. This shows the sense of arrogance, entitlement, and also the violent politics and the violent ways that are pursued by Uddhav ki Sena. It also shows that this is not a one-off incident, but a serial offender as far as violence is concerned. They have attacked a 60-year-old Navy veteran. They have attacked other people also physically and violently. And now this attack on artists, including Sonu Nigam. It only shows the mindset and it only shows the approach of politics that Uddhav Sena now believes in. This is complete political frustration, and it also is something that the people of Maharashtra have totally rejected. Today, Uddhavji should tell us whether he will take action on this MLA, whether he will take action on the MLA's son, and whether such kind of politics is condoned by him or condemned by him. This is the true face of Uddhavji ki Sena, and unfortunately, today, once again, we have witnessed the politics of violence and gundagardi that has now become the norm for his people.
Singer Sonu Nigam and his team were manhandled by a Shiv Sena member at a music event in Mumbai's Chembur suburb. The singer was performing at the festival when the son of a local MLA believed to be associated with Uddhav Thackeray's Shiv Sena camp misbehaved with Nigam's manager Saira. The MLA's son wanted to click a photo with Sonu, and that's why he ended up going on the stage. The man then asked Sonu's manager to get off the stage, and when Sonu was getting down from the stage, the man ended up pushing Sonu on the backstage steps. Now, Sonu Nigam has filed a complaint at the Chembur police station, and there's shocking breaking news coming in from Mumbai, where Sonu Nigam and his team were manhandled by a Shiv Sena member at a music event. Our correspondent Mihir is joining us to give us more details on this. Mihir, what exactly happened at the event?
Absolutely. So this was a festival that was taking place, a cultural festival in Mumbai's Chembur area, where Sonu Nigam was part of the finale act. In fact, it was his performance that was, one of the highlights of the show. Now, after his performance at that particular festival, Sonu Nigam was actually trying to get down off the stage. That's when this gentleman approached him and tried to get a selfie. The situation was not such that he could have accommodated that, and his people around him, his aide and security guards, tried to restrain this person from taking that selfie, and that kind of led into a scuffle where a lot of pushing happened. In fact, Sonu Nigam himself lost his balance. One of his aides fell off the stage and hurt himself very seriously. He was taken to the hospital after the incident, and it turns out that this person was the son of Shiv Sena MLA of the Uddhav Thackeray faction, and that's when things got onto the social media as well. But as far as Sonu Nigam is concerned, he has clearly stated in his bite after filing a complaint that he was in a sense pushed. His people and his aides were pushed around just for a selfie, which he was not able to accommodate at that point while he was getting off the stage, and that really enraged this person who's also a MLA's son, but also the MLA was the organizer of the show. So that's how he got onto the stage and tried to get that selfie. Now clearly, as far as Sonu Nigam is concerned, he has stated that he could not accommodate that selfie, but this person insisted. In fact, he started getting physical with his staff and also pushed Sonu Nigam to an extent where he lost balance. So that's why he had no option but to go to Chembur police station and file a complaint, even also because one of his aides really got injured and he was taken to the hospital in this particular scuffle of sorts.
Right, Mihir. Let's first listen in to Sonu Nigam's reaction after being attacked at the event.
कुछ नहीं हुआ कॉन्सर्ट करके उतारा था, और वो जो आजकल आप लोग की जो सेल्फी और फोटोग्राफ का जो चला हुआ है ना, नहीं उसको समझता नहीं, तो उसने पकड़ लिया मुझे, तो पकड़ा तो उसके बाद में उसका नाम है स्वप्निल प्रकाश वातरकर, वो बाद में मुझे मालूम पड़ा। उसने पकड़ लिया तो मुझे बचाने के लिए पहले हरी कहाँ है, हाँ हरी प्रकाश, पहले हरी को उसने पुश किया, तो वो वीडियो में देखेंगे राइट हैंड साइड में पहले हरी को पुश किया है। उसके बाद जब मुझे पुश किया तो मैं गिर गया, देखा होगा वीडियो में मैं नीचे गिर गया हूँ। हाँ, मैं स्टेप पे गिर गया, तो अगर मैं साइड में होता तो मैं गिर जाता, तो मैं स्टेप पे गिरा, तो मुझे बचाने के लिए रब्बानी आए और रब्बानी को तो उसने ऐसे पीछे किया तो उसके बच गया, वो मर जाता वो, अगर नीचे कुछ लोहा होता तो गया था वो।
So, Mir, we just heard Sonu Nigam mentioning the name of the accused as Swapnil. Has the accused been arrested as of now?
At this point, an FIR has been filed in this particular case.
Hello, Namaskar. This is First Post and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma.